Welcome to another episode of the Golden Hour. I'm Sharif Yunus, joined by Dr. Kevin Majors. Kevin, welcome.
Sharif, it's great to be back here today.
Well, we just launched a tweak to the projects page, a small update. And
But a lot of thought went into it.
yeah, it was agonizing.
Yes.
So it was basically updating the guidance that goes into how you set up goals, which was actually now changed to goal, and guidance for setting the strategy for the project. So just quick background, whenever you set up a project, we want to help you craft the project and shape it so that you can do it in a better way than you've done it before. So in that process, we have you first identify the goal that you want to attain in completing the project, then the strategy for how you're going to achieve that goal, and then you use that to lay out steps for how you're going to complete the project. So then we made some changes to the goal and the strategy. Kevin, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think what we found is that many times in the feedback we would get, it seems like people were using projects as just a place where they put things. Yeah, that they like tasks that last longer than, say, one golden hour. But they weren't necessarily shaping what they're doing. So they were, it seems like, and the advice that we were giving, it maybe wasn't so clear that the goal is actually to reshape the way you approach this kind of task. Because I think it's just so easy that whenever you sit down to do something, you just you exploit your previous way of doing it, and you do it again that same way, which makes sense. But it just ends up that people do things the same way again and again and again. And then projects could be just a way of keeping track of that. It's like a way of tracking the status quo. But we actually wanted it to be able to be a laboratory for changing the status quo. So that you are, by laying out what's the goal you're seeking, which ideally is some better way of doing it. And then what's the strategy, which ideally, again, is some new way of doing it. Then you come up with the steps that embody those. So to me, that's the exciting part about projects is just like a golden hour shapes this next hour so you do it in a new way and experience growth in it. The project should shape a task. So that you're doing that kind of task in a new and better way. And then it can be an extremely powerful tool, but because it's changing the substance of your way of working. And that to me is where real growth occurs.
Maybe it would be helpful to have an example.
I think that any example would be you take a task that that has, let's say, just enough steps to be a lot to handle. So if you for students, the clearest one is writing a paper. And in some ways, we had asked them in the past, okay, what would done look like? Okay, what would it mean to be totally done with it and to do it well? But then it's just like putting in the specifications of the paper. This many pages and this many hours of writing, with no grammatical errors.
That's the goal.
Yeah, I think that could have been the goal in the past. But is that really getting them to think about writing a paper in a new and better way? To think intelligently, to bring their intelligence to the process of how they go about doing it. So now what we do is we encourage people to think of either how they can grow by doing this. So it could be, with attaining a greater mastery, in some aspect. That's a growth that's in them. Or depending on the kind of task you're doing, it could be sustaining a spirit of service while you're doing it, or maintaining cheerfulness while you're doing it. So you can have goals that are about what you are using this task to practice growing in. And so any kind of ideal would be, serving others or deepening a bond, that would be the goal.
What would you think about on that, in that vein of growing in knowledge? Is that an appropriate thing? I think that's a common thing if you're reading or you're writing a paper, that you kind of just want to cross the finish line. I just want to get, finish this chapter. I just want to get to have written 6 pages, having written 6 pages. But to actually grow in understanding of the material. Would that fit with what you're talking about here?
I think it would. And so I think that you can grow in knowledge or skills or ideals or in serving others. So there's a lot of ways you can think of growth. But I guess the key thing here is that it's something that stays within you. Because sometimes when people are doing things, they think that the real thing is actually the outcome. Like that they finished that paper, they got that grade, they got that promotion. Outcomes can kind of seem more real, but in fact, they're transitory. And so you attain them, but the good is there, but then it starts fading. That every kind of outcome you can attain, they tend to kind of go stale in themselves. They seem real, but they're not. And so yeah, you get that promotion, but then life doesn't really change because you haven't actually changed. And so your own growth, now that actually is real and enduring change. And so to think of the tasks you're doing as ways that you could grow opens up the real kind of core of optimal work, which is ultimately how to bring your highest ideals into each hour of work. That's the main mission that we have. But it means that you're trying to get people to reshape how they do something so that they grow, or at least that they attain, this is the second half, that the finished product is in some way higher quality. So more polished, more accurate, precise, or more, I don't know, pleasing or humorous, or whatever it might be that you're going for.
There it's very helpful to have this kind of sense of what this type of work can be like, and where you can have role models. So you can, if you're writing a paper, you can have examples of very good essayists or researchers, famous people, and you can. That's where it's helpful to look at their work and see, well, what are they doing that I can try to imitate? This person is really good at telling stories or giving really clear examples, or this person checks all the relevant research. So that's what I'm going to aim for with this project.
I think that's one of the very best ways of doing it. Yes. You find out who is right now doing this in the best way, and then try to learn from them. So once you have the goal of really stretching yourself and growing, then you can look at the experts and see what are the strategies that they use. So, and you start to look at their work in a different way. It's not just the content, but you're looking at the process. How are they thinking about this question? How do they organize their thoughts? How do they use examples? How do they use data? But you start finding higher ways of learning, and you see that really the best people in the field have mastered all of these subsets of skills. And then you just choose how you're going to prioritize what you're going to be working on right now, and you keep just building up this kind of repertoire of skills. And I think especially for young people new on a job, say mid-20s, young professionals, the key thing is, are they really increasing their skills in a continual way? Continually finding ways of growing in new skills. But that's what setting goals should do. So you set a goal for a task so that you're going to now use this task to serve your own growth, which is ultimately so that you can better serve others.
The first thing is identifying that goal, which is something that you can do better, a way that you can do this task better than you've ever done it before, or that you can grow through it. And then closely following that is then the strategy, where now you're actually trying to figure out how exactly am I going to achieve this new goal. So for example, if we're writing a paper and our goal is to be maybe thorough in evaluating the relevant research or something like that, then I want to see examples of people who have done that and try to figure out how they did that. How is this researcher so thorough? Is that so? That requires being creative, right? I mean, that's a difficult thing to either come up with a strategy on my own, or to ask someone for what their strategy is, or to try and observe someone to figure out what their strategy is.
Yeah, and I think just like with goals, setting goals, there's a sweet spot there, which is what is the right level of stretch. Okay, so you want to be if you set a goal that was way beyond what you could do, you could get discouraged. But there is a right level of stretch, and it doesn't have to be that big. Just 10% better, as some people say, is enough. to attain, it might even be that's how you attain maximal growth. But when it comes to strategies, there's a sweet spot in how creative, new, and flexible your strategies are. So you want to be thinking, how do I tweak it upwards in terms of creativity? And then you're going to need ideas, which you get from seeing how the best people do it. Cal Newport, in his wonderful book on how to be a straight A student in college, what he does is he takes the skills like writing papers, taking notes, and so on, and shows then what are the strategies that the best students at the best universities have used in doing that kind of task. And I think it's just a gold mine because you see all these different approaches that they would take, and then you can be experimenting with those approaches.
Hmm. Although, yeah, it's interesting to know with that book that how the goal shapes the strategy, because I think at the beginning he kind of says explicitly that these strategies have the goal in mind of being a straight A student while having lots of free time. So that may be, I mean, that's a
It's
fine goal for
it was
college,
interesting.
maybe, but maybe it's not the best
I guess
goal.
maybe it's like a lowest common denominator as far as
Yeah.
goals go for writing for a college audience.
Yeah.
But the strategies themselves do show a lot of expertise.
And they're great.
Yeah,
I think they're kind of great starting points for anyone. But if maybe your goal in college is to become, a great, start my career as a great scientist or something like that, then maybe you want to build on those strategies in some way. But they're great starting points, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that what seeing people who are really good at those things does is it does give you a sense of what is possible. And you can have the sense that, okay, that it can be done somehow. But it's like sometimes we can't really underestimate how hard it can be for people to change. There is a built-in drive we have to maintain the status quo. And that seems just to be part of the architecture of our brains. That in some ways, the brain, like especially your default mode attention, your background attention, is all about predicting errors and minimizing errors. So it's trying to always be making the prediction of how things are going to turn out. But as a result, it tends to fix your strategies for how to do things so that they always turn out that same way. It's almost like it gets more satisfaction in having predicted right how it will turn out, than anything else. So that you tend to always do things the same way without even realizing it.
So that kind of gives a hint at how projects relates to the kind of broader context of things that we also like to talk about, of just generally engaging challenge in life, so that doing projects well becomes a kind of training ground also for developing this new approach to life.
Yeah, that like when you sit down to do an hour of work and you shape it in advance, that's the idea of the golden hour, which involves all these same steps. But thinking of how you go about doing tasks, you want to bring in the same creativity and newness and flexibility, so that you actually can change and try to have a new strategy. Because people might think that they want to change, but as long as they're using the same old strategy, they're going to get the same old results. And so it's like, are they really, they're still expecting really the same results, which kind of makes you wonder, are they still desiring the same results? So this is actually an interesting neuroscience question, that is there a difference between desiring something and expecting something? At least for a large part of our brain, it's the same thing. So when you think about even something like hunger, is there a difference between desiring food and expecting that it's time to eat? So you tend to get hungry right before you would have a typical meal. Your body's expecting to eat. And that expectation you experience as hunger. And if you decide to be fasting, then you typically can go long periods without experiencing hunger at all. Now, the desire for food should still be there, but the expectation is not there. So there's in any kind of craving, actually, there's a very close link between expecting something and desiring something. And you can see this, like when people are trying to change their own behaviors in any way. Just we go to that broader context. I don't know, name anything the person would be trying to change. Some behavior, like the habit they're trying to break. Like say a person has been he decides for a certain period of time at least he's not going to drink alcohol. And so he says but let's say that he still knows he's going to go to the party, and he kind of expects he's going to drink. So on the one hand, he thinks he'll say he desires not to, but then he puts himself right back in the same situation with the same people, the same sequence of events unfolds, and then he would certainly drink again. So as long as he has that expectation, which might be hard to get at, like when someone really wants to change a behavior, and then you say, "Are you committed to change?" Yes. Do you expect to change? That's the harder question. And they might actually say, no, because they actually haven't done the work of forging a new strategy that would likely give them new results. You need the newness in the strategy. Then you can actually be open to be surprised by the change occurring. But if you're not doing a new strategy that could surprise you with how well it works, you have to be open to that surprise. And then you can actually change. But you have to be, and so what we want people to do is, to be, like thinking through, like in projects, the steps that they're going to be going through. But they should be experimenting. They should be creative so that they're going to find a way to stretch themselves and grow and do it in a new way. Then they actually will be open to expecting different results. And in a way, that's a sign that they are deeply desiring the growth. They're trying something new to obtain it.
So in this example you've given with the person who, say, in some way desires not to drink, they might blame it on kind of a lack of self-control or lack of willpower or lack of discipline or something. But what you're saying is really it's just they're not putting in the effort to try a new strategy. They're just not thinking about it. So really the best strategy might just be to not go to that party.
Yeah, in some ways you could say the real thing that sincerity has to get down to is what are the actual steps you're going to take to make the change practical and to make it actually happen. And if they're not really thinking about new steps, and new ways of handling particular triggers, and coming up with a strategy to handle those triggers, then they're going to get the same results. And they should expect, in a sense, the same results as before. And so it's interesting in my mind that the very same process that you can use to grow in work immediately applies to any issue of self-control. You have to set a higher goal, some way of doing this better, of handling this trigger better or doing it better, and with new strategies that you've thought out in advance to implement, that you lay down that track, then you can be surprised by how well these strategies work. But the most difficult thing in getting people to change and getting people to grow, and I see this in my psychiatric practice sometimes, is just getting to the point where they're willing to try a new strategy. Because it can be scary to change. And again, times you side more with the devil you know than the devil you don't know. So it's like, well, at least I know how, there's something comfortable about the status quo, even if it's actually painful. And so it can be scary to change it, and that's understandable. But at the same time, it's great to have a sense of being curious and open and experimenting. So trying continually new and better ways of doing something. That's what causes people to grow, it's what causes families to grow, and it causes companies and society to grow. When there's a kind of a spirit of adventure, that you're really learning, how can I come up with new and better ways of doing this thing?
Then maybe we can just complete kind of the discussion of projects to discuss the steps too. So how does steps fit into this picture? So we talked about goal and then having a new strategy, having a higher goal, having a new strategy, and then steps, I suppose, make it kind of concrete. They tell you, exactly what you're going to be doing. Are they always necessary, or what kind of form should they take, and how are those helpful to people in making these changes?
Yeah, it's a great question to discuss. I think my first thought is that people always have steps. So in some way, particularly if it's a task that they've done before. And maybe that's the easiest way to think about, projects, which is like, this is for tasks that come up in some regular way that you want to use to grow or you want to improve how you do it. And so because of that, you are going to exploit previous steps. and you're just going to do it automatically. So what we suggest is you lay that out deliberately in advance so that you can deliberately shape it. Because whatever the task is that you're used to doing, you actually do have specific steps that you follow. And the harder something is to change, the more precise those steps actually are. And they can be extremely fixed. You see this in OCD, like when people get triggered by something, like let's say that they're afraid of contamination by something. And you think, okay, when the contamination that you had feared seems to have happened, what exactly do you do? Yeah, and it's like, oh, okay, well, first I wrinkle my nose, then I shake my head back and forth 5 times, and then I start saying, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no in my head. And I've had people lay out sequences of 11 steps that they just keep going, and they do it exactly the same every time. So OCD is, it's sort of, there really are very fixed strategies to particular triggers. And so that's just an example. Like the steps are usually there. I would encourage people to try to just write them out so they can think about them. And just that act of writing shifts them from the background, implicit knowledge to more explicit, foreground attention. And that allows you then to be, well, that's where creativity takes place. Creativity does not take place so much in the background. It's actually you in the present moment, fully with your attention, putting your whole intelligence into now shaping this task as if you're doing it for the first time, or thinking of how you could best do it. And for that, you really do want to have a goal in mind. The steps should be shaped by the goal so that they really do help you to attain it. So if you're trying to improve mastery in the way you do something, well, that could mean a lot of different things. So I don't know, Sharif, you think of your work of programming. Does your work have particular steps that you typically follow? Say if we're gonna have a new feature on OptimalWork.
So yeah, I kind of have a strategy for how I go about doing it. Basically, I start with the design component and then try to work that out. And then once I have that, then I work on the data part of it. And then the last part is kind of the logic for how those two fit together. And then I try to write tests for that before, and then I write the logic part.
But if you're going to try to be using programming the next feature in OptimalWork, to grow in some way, then how would you work that into your steps? Let's say you want to just grow in mastery of programming. How would you actually think about working that into steps or into the strategy?
Right. Yeah, I think typically, I think with programming, a lot of the opportunities for growth come in doing more of the work up front. So for example, like just thinking through what the potential obstacles might be, laying that out kind of in advance. So putting more emphasis on the design part. It's just like writing an outline for a paper before you start. So I think I would kind of put more steps towards the beginning, trying to. In fact, one thing that I was working on my last project was that after I did all this stuff, I ended up with a lot of repeated code. So it's like being repetitive in a paper. It's not good. So I think so that's a good then area of growth for me, is to try to eliminate those. So what I had to do is eliminate them at the end, which ends up being kind of time consuming and also exposes the code to more errors, more mistakes. So if I could have done that at the beginning to identify where are these things that are going to repeat, and let me kind of craft that component first and build on top of it.
Yeah, so when you have the sense of wanting to grow in mastery, is that an end in itself for you? Like you just want more mastery?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just want to become the best coder I can possibly be. No, so I suppose I want to do it so that I can code the website better and so that people can enjoy using it more or get more out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and so there's a sense that when you're working on it, like every little stretch you put in to like make sure you're like improving how you go about outlining in advance or doing something ends up being that is where the meaning comes in. So you actually get more meaning all through the project because it's like you're doing it, you're stretching yourself in this new way so that you can better serve people, give them a better experience, or if let's say you're working on how quickly you do things, it's so that we can have more more ways of serving people and more things that come out. But wherever the stretch is, that's also where the meaning is. And because ultimately, you're not growing just for yourself or having a better product for its own sake, but it's ultimately to serve others better.
I got to keep that in mind. Good. Well, Kevin, hey, it's our time is up now, so we got to finish now. But do you have any last thoughts you want to end on?
Just, I think that the best attitude that we can have when we see something in our life that needs to change is, or say it could even be in a relationship, something in a relationship that you'd like to, to see improve, is just to be curious. What's the fixed strategy that you're using? The harder it is to change, the more precisely fixed it is. So try to just be curious what those steps are, and then see how could you bring a sense of creativity or flexibility to those steps.
Awesome. Great.
Very much the essence. Yeah.
That is the essence of optimal work.
Exactly.
Cool. Thanks so much, Kevin. We will be back
Thank you, Sharif.
next week.